Is that on? Yeah. So I'll just undo this. So for this panel, we're going to have Michael back on stage. We're also going to have Sun from Flock, and we're going to have Wes from Backyard. So you guys are ready. Hello. So thank you for joining the panel. We're going to talk about, we do have two more speakers joining remotely, so we'll just wait for them to come up. Yeah. But while we're doing that, I'll just introduce the panel. So we're going to talk about what are the existing and potential upsides and downsides of decentralized data. So first, an intro from all of you.
Yes, thank you so much for letting us participate. My name is Wes Floyd from the Backyard project team. We're very much focused on decentralized compute or decentralized data sets, so we're very passionate about this topic. It's near and dear to our heart.
Cool. My name is Jiahao Zhang. I'm the CEO of Block. Our company name is itself is on better learning blockchain. Block also meaning a decentralized hub of things, right? So yeah. So what we do is we're creating a framework that's open and accessible for everyone, and then it's running with on-chain, off-chain, and then privacy. Very similar to what I was talking about.
Yep. And you guys just heard who I am. So yeah, humanity, Michael here.
Cool. We do have two more speakers joining remotely. To make sure that they get their intro as well. But before they join, let's just go through the first question. So first, please explain what you think is meant by decentralized data for the room.
I'll give some genres of decentralized data because I think it's a very fast-growing space. There have been technologies like OceanDAO in the past, which use, like, if you talk about like decentralized money or decentralized finance, the decentralization of data could mean ownership and fractional ownership of that data that exists not in centralized systems, but in sort of pseudo-decentralized systems, which still give you some trust and some ownership, but much more fluidity and flexibility. And then also, one of the organizations that we're part of within the Filecoin community, FVM, is going to be coming out soon, and they're going to try to enable people to launch decentralized ownership of data in a similar mechanism. So I think it's sort of a range of technologies.
Okay, so as we are doing better learning, so we are more streaming towards what's decentralized data. We want those data always stay in everyone's own device and never leave that into the tool. So yeah, that's why we need a better learning. So we make trainings, but then we do not need to access your data from any central server. So that's where I think the fine of this decentralized data world should be.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think where we'd love to get to is in the end is you're not even leaving the device to get as far to the edge as possible.
That's really interesting. So starting with you, Michael, because I think you just spoke about this. What do you think are the main risks with sort of the security and privacy aspect, especially with sort of personal data and data that needs to remain, as you say, you're making synthetic data, but like, what are the main risks with that? So things like reverse engineering with synthetic data, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a longer conversation about whether you can reverse engineer synthetic data. I think over certain thresholds of kind of people in stratifications is not really possible, but longer conversation. I think anonymization has always had that big problem, is because we try to take different steps to add noise, or we take off different identifying factors, and I think a lot of that was a little bit of wishful thinking, because I think as the process is to, and if you can combine several data sets together, it was really always possible to re-identify people. I think one thing was a very pragmatic thing that we finally got to the synthetic data on, was that there was amazing work being done, it continues to be done by a lot of folks who actually allow for federated learning on the real data and to have a lot of different protections, differential privacy and other things that you can do to try to protect it, what we came to is that it was beginning to be a little bit of a limiting factor to wait for that to be scalable. And it was a bit like when I got into Web3 because I ran the largest consumer VPN in the world, and I started talking with Jeb at Stellar and like everybody that had any kind of scalability, and we were all trying to do everything on chain, and finally we realized, hey, maybe we don't need to do everything on chain. And that was kind of the moment there. So I think that's similar, if we could do the synthetic data, so that I think it's avoid a little bit of privacy issues.
That's really interesting. Just because we have Ben on the line now, Ben, you could give a quick intro to yourself and then also answer the question about, I think it's quite good because you're doing decentralized AI. So what are the main risks with sort of more sensitive data?
Absolutely. Let me know if you can't hear me. Otherwise, I will just keep talking. So hey, I'm Ben, one of the co-founders of Jensen. We're a decentralized machine learning compute protocol. Essentially, we want to provide access to GPUs, TPUs, any kind of machine learning capable compute to anyone in the world, and allow anyone that has that compute to offer it out to other people in a kind of fully decentralized way. I previously ran a data privacy startup as well, so a lot of these kind of issues are pretty close to my heart. I think one of the biggest sort of downsides of decentralizing data is just handing to individuals the choices around that data. There's been loads of attempts, I think, of people who've tried to monetize data for individuals and things like that. But I think people can quite quickly get a bit sort of paralyzed by all of the options that are available to them. And I think a lot of the work that needs to be done in this space is people building these tools and UXs so that everybody understands what they're doing and what choices they're actually making, what consents they're giving out, and things like that.
Okay, and so Michael, you spoke about the possibility and also the idea about the universal attack. So I've got another angle of it, because we're doing the data ownership stuff in Web3, it comes with some compensation in terms of, I don't know, coins or rewards, right? Then there's easily another important attack will be, that's the malicious client or malicious copycats who just copy your data because your data is valuable, and then if they are computing the same network, they're getting, let's say, same level of or similar level of contribution to the final result, and then you will get a good reward, right? But of course, there will be some mechanism to eliminate those malicious clients, but also there are some ways to counteract. For example, I'm just adding one more normal distributional noise to the data I copied from you, but then the data itself already looks different, and you can't tell because just my data, your data, and we both contribute to a good model. How can you tell it's different, right? So that's also why I love promoting. I love writing those papers about those game theory stuff and trying to eliminate all those malicious clients and showing our CSO will be this talk later. Can I speak?
Thank you so much. Next question, I'll go direct to Wes. How do you think decentralized data can create more efficient systems?
It's a really interesting area to talk about because traditionally data sets have been centralized. Consumer data sets, enterprise data sets have been consumer, and a lot of the processing technologies have built to manage centralized processing. A lot of deep learning algorithms rely on data being close to where the processing is happening, high memory bandwidth, and all these sorts of things. But what we're seeing now in the space, which is really interesting, is rebuilding those algorithms in a decentralized world, like what you guys are doing is a great example. We also see some folks that say we can do training of models of data that may live in different places. So if you have to decentralize, even geographically, part of your training set is in one country, part of it's in a different continent, then there's these newer algorithms that will allow you to train machine learning models over there. So I think what's happening is we have the incentive mechanisms, like the crypto incentive mechanisms that are enabling decentralization. We have the decentralized storage technologies, which are enabling decentralized data. And now we're seeing the research come along as well to enable that. And I think we're in a really fun place with its development. Yeah.
Thank you. Ben, how would you like to follow on from that? I think that's quite a good segue because you're on the AI side and Wes is on the data side. So yeah. Oh, muted.
There we go. I think I strongly agree that we're kind of seeing a lot more progress on the research side and techniques to actually do machine learning and deep learning over distributed and highly decentralized data. I think previously, maybe when machine learning and deep learning was getting going and starting to be this kind of exciting technique, there was a rush to grab as much data as possible, collect it all in one place and train as big models as possible. It feels like now we're moving into that kind of world of like personalized AI, where we realize that we can train a big model on a big centralized data set, but then we can send it out and we can get huge benefits from training it at the edge or on kind of siloed data sets for privacy reasons or just for efficiency reasons as well. With federated learning, we've got it in kind of Google Keyboard right now. It's been running for a long time. It works quite effectively. I'm sure there's other applications within the iPhones on the computer vision side and things like that. So it's starting to get out there. And I think as people build more and more of these applications, the kind of knowledge spreads in saying, hey, federated learning is just an established technique. We know it works. We know it works on siloed data and edge data, and we can just kind of get it out there and do that. That's one of the things with Jensen we want to do for kind of general large scale training, is show people that you can just use these disparate pieces of compute to train your model, and you can kind of use data at the edge without it having to be sent all over the place.
Super interesting. I've got an interesting one because this is a DSAC conference, which you would think is about blockchain, but a lot of decentralized data is not actually on a blockchain. So I want to ask, how do you think blockchain technology impacts decentralized data systems? Do we need a blockchain for decentralized data systems, or can we do it without?
Okay. Yeah, of course, when answering this question, certainly you don't have to, right? So there are already different schools of thinking when it comes to decentralized data in this Web3 world. People will put in data maybe on-chain or on a different mechanism like IPFS or Filecoin, right? It's fundamentally a different way to store those data or use those data. So it's already having different options for data today. And also when it comes to some centralized mechanisms like what Community just proposed, right? Have a centralized container for the data, but then synthetic data to be used in more safer way, like a how should we call it, a controlled environment for security maybe. Yeah, so yeah, there are different ways, right? Already today. So of course, I wouldn't say that it has to be on blockchain. Any new technologies that can be proposed and that can be proved to be great, then we should have a look.
One other interesting anecdote is, so I'm relatively new to academia, so I'm getting to learn all about how these different things work. And having conversations with a group, there's a very large physics system in Switzerland that collects large amounts of data. What's interesting about that is these billions of dollars that go into these sensors cost, it's time, it's money, it's all these researchers. And you think about what happens to that data after it comes off those sensors. Should that data immediately be available to the public? Should it be available to the researchers who are doing the research around it? And in today's, in absence of crypto economic incentives, it's kind of a binary thing. It's the researchers who built the system that have the first access to do the research on it and publish on it. But then, if you had a crypto economic incentive system and you could have these massive research systems beyond high energy physics in any domain that's very capital intensive, but you could make the data publicly available in portions, and you could use fractionalization to let people pay for it in different ways, would that open up expensive research to other folks? It just gives more possibilities, I think, for capitalization of research.
Might I think if we do our job right, I think we might accelerate towards a ubiquity of data. I hope this is not like a 20-year journey of trying to open up more data. I feel like if we do the right steps, we can do this quite quickly. I would see, I still am trying to get my head around all the uses of Web3, but the attribution and kind of the incentivization, I feel like the actual creation of the models on top of the data. So see the data as much more of a foundational layer. We did a great job the last 5 years. It's ubiquitous. We all have access to it, much like the internet. And then we're all building on top of it. And I think that's, so all the same things that you were thinking of with incentivization of data and all that stuff, but I would see it actually playing out much more on incentivization of creation of models, attribution of who created that model when we use it in our system. All that kind of stuff is pretty cool.
I'd say Yeah, I strongly agree with the incentivization points. I think it's one of the absolute strongest things that we have with Web3 tech. And one of the big ones for me and for us at Jensen is trust, ultimately. I'm not sure exactly how it unfolds for data. With compute specifically, we need essentially a third party that we can trust. When you're verifying that something has been performed on a data set, you have to know that somebody is checking that. The only way to do that in a large group of people without having a centralized party is via some kind of consensus of the group. And essentially Web3 and blockchain provides that consensus. I think when it comes to data, I'm sure the guys here can speak more clearly than I can on it, but I think around provenance of data and kind of proving that where the data's come from and it's the right piece of data for a specific task, perhaps that consensus and that kind of ultimate judge arbiter proof is useful in decentralizing data.
That's great. Just to bring it back to the DeSci conference, what do you think are the main benefits? And also, like, if we don't decentralize data, what are the sort of, everything will go terribly for science. So, why do we need to decentralize data for science?
I think I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm optimistic. It goes with most of the nature. I think we now have the tools to answer a lot of the questions that we have about health, about these things. It's like open up the data, give more people the opportunity to test their ideas, and then open up those results. I think we're actually there's a huge opportunity cost that we're now bearing every single day because we're not doing that. And I think that's why DeSci is so important, because there's no future we need to wait for. It's actually right now. The data exists on Earth. We have the tools. We have the brain power of 8 billion people. Like this is a time that we can just open it up. I think DeSci is the main part of that.
Yeah, and also science, right? Science is like everything. So it's a good opportunity for either tool providers or technology providers who can, in reach of a broad community of researchers in different domain-specific problems. That was something I actually had no idea about, but then today I heard someone talk about it. Oh yeah, there's a need of decentralized data as well. So yeah, I think the DeSci as a central topic for this general community, I think that's important. Quite important.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about like recent public health issues over the past few years. What would have been different if decentralized data was ubiquitous to those researchers and they had easy-to-use tools like the ones that people are trying to build now? Would that have improved the ability for transparency and those things like that? So I think if we can build better tools in the space, it can have a lot of tangible impact on our day-to-day life.
I think to me, it's the reduction in bias for the things that we discover and kind of research, basically. There's been a long time kind of in the past when we've had small sort of groups of people doing the research and figuring things out and deciding what kind of happens next in terms of science and research. One of the interesting things that we've seen in the deep learning space is we kind of see it as the 3 main sort of blockers to deep learning getting wider and kind of being deployed more further. The first one is expert knowledge. It's just people who know exactly how to build these models. The second one is data, and the third one is access to compute. The first one, expert knowledge, seemed to have been kind of blown away really, really quickly. There's so many people in the world that now know how to do deep learning, how to build models, how to deploy models, and how to train them on data. The data one has kind of been happening a little bit more quickly than compute. We're getting access to larger data sets out in the wild. People are doing kind of open source data set curation and things. And then we've got finally compute, which is simply a kind of access control problem, basically creating the rails between compute and people to allow those individuals who now have the knowledge, they're starting to get access to the data, and then they can get access to the compute, and they can bring novel kind of ideas around how to build those models and what we should look for. Whereas before we had the same groups doing the same thing for kind of decades, progressing research in the way that they thought should be done.
Amazing. I'd like to leave the floor open for questions because I think it's an opportunity to ask more questions here. So please. The box is not on.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Cool. Yeah, cool talk. To bring it back to DSI and to bring it back to the upsides and the downsides, which is the reason for this panel. When it comes to AI, I find that there's an analogy that can be made to the sort of biological side of science, where you've got an ecosystem and then you've got, sort of like the keystone species, which is sort of, which the rest of the ecosystem sort of dependent upon. To come back to your analogy, I think the keystone in this case would be the model, and then the data would be the rest of the ecosystem. So, if the model dies, the rest of the ecosystem, basically, or the data, the incentive kind of disappears, right? So now I'm curious, because what AI tends to do is that it kind of is this concentric circle that kind of gets, more and more tighter. Doesn't that eat into the incentives in terms of just how the whole ecosystem will kind of be kept alive, if that kind of makes sense?
I think so. Maybe one of your conjectures was different than what I was saying. I think the data, people have a lot of different reasons to create the data. They're using different apps. They're doing different things. I think the data itself doesn't live or die because of one use case.
No, incentives to actually create. Yeah, there's social incentives, but also they're monetary because people need to.
Yeah, and I think what we see from like the consumer side is that there's actually a lot of great reasons for people to give their health data to a lot of different apps because they get an n=1 value back. I'm actually not a huge believer people want to contribute. Not because people don't want to, it's just that we almost don't need to worry about that because they're already giving their data for the n=1 value of many, many different apps and use cases. The question is whether we can then, in those flows, actually get consent to not share their data, but to actually learn from their data to create these synthetic data sets or create these external data sets. That's the, and I don't think that, the good thing about that is, maybe to your question, is that the robustness of that is actually huge because there's so many different reasons why you might want to give access to your health data. And as long as you're then okay to also give the ability to create synthetic data off of that, then that data lives and can be used for many different reasons.
Cool. Yeah, the question of incentive there still like in an end state, right? Because AI kind of just sucks out all sort of value. I think that's kind of still remains a question to be answered.
I think there might actually be what we need is diversity of that data. I think there's probably, as AI and machine learning gets better, we probably need less of it. We just need it more diverse and less of it.
Then you get to like one-shot learning, and then
what you don't want to do is end up with the result of all the computation is then held as the ground truth in the beginning of everything. I think the dynamic nature of continuing to collect more and more data, like every single day collecting new data on people is important so that you don't. I think science has shown us that Alzheimer's is a great example of heading down one track without looking back. So I definitely agree that we need to make sure that we continually keep to the foundation, which is that's dynamic every single day, new data.
Any other questions? Not quite. Ladies right from here.
Thank you. Great conversation, appreciated. So my question is around who can be using this data, or put another way, which organizations? Is it like pharmaceutical companies, health plans? Do you plan to engage with them in any way, or what's the plan there?
Yeah.
More for humanity, I think. But anyone can answer. Sure.
Yeah, so the vision of this thing is that everybody can have access. And so it's I think the overall good, you could say this about the internet as well, is if we were selectively giving access to people that have a good reason for it. I just don't think it's the right way to look at these systems. So I think, everyone.
My question is, so if we want to use, let's say I want to develop a diagnostic device using the data that's out there, decentralized. And so the issue will always, I think, be on the regulatory side of things, because these will not be highly controlled data sets, right? You wouldn't be able to use it to show the diagnostic efficacy of whatever you have. So you still have to go through the whole trial, basically the entire set of trials to launch a diagnostic device using that, that data. And also, like, for example, if you want to launch a diagnostic technology in the US, you need to show that it works based on the US data. So the population statistics must come from the US and not from anywhere else. So how would like this decentralized approach would, it may not be used perhaps for doing everything, but maybe for biomarker discovery and so on. Like, so what do you think is the number one use case that can be used now, and it will be useful for developing technologies that can be used in healthcare, for example?
Actually, we are leading this research collaboration with AstraZeneca, Google, together to apply for UK funding to do this. We call it public verifiable clinical trial, where you're not using any specific data, you just use your Apple Watch TV or any other wearables. I shouldn't just say one brand, right? Any wearables, yes. And then all the data, the track of the data are public verifiable on the blockchain. That's why we need blockchain to implement into this, because everyone can see it, can verify it, that your data never leave any of your own device. But still, the pharmaceutical companies or any clinical trial companies, they can get the result that they want. For example, they like to see a time series analysis and then see some outliers of your sleeping conditions, things like that, right? So that can be directly feedback to a model where they can get a result of their, let's say, testing drugs. So I know it sounds a bit too fantasy, like it almost sounds like you can do a clinical trial now with that public verifiable technology. You can do a clinical trial now without consent from patients, because the data you never collected, so you never touched that data, right? Why should you sign a consent? But well, yeah, there's still regulations, of course. But at least with this blockchain and public verifiable technologies, that you can see that everyone can verify that this is true, that nobody's playing evil.
At the risk of taking too much time on the mic, just a shout out to one of our scientific advisory board members who actually pushed us towards looking at biobank data in the first place. Her name's Kristen Fortney, and she runs BioAge, and they just released amazing kind of a phase two data on a drug that they're making for sarcopenia, so basically atrophy of muscles as you get older. And what's happening right now in biotech a lot, not talking about AI, but use of data, is there's such a failure rate of you have an idea, you start going down that road, you even get it into trials. There's so much unseen failure rate of those drugs that's where a lot of the cost comes from. So right now in biotech, the thing that data is doing is it's basically drastically increasing the success rate. And when I say drastically increasing, it goes from 3% to 10%, but it's taking a lot of that failure rate out of it. I think eventually we're looking at a lot of in silico modeling, but yeah, right now it's more about, yes, you still need that human trial. Those steps, it's hard to change that, but your failure rate of the drug that goes into that process is lowering quite a bit.
I think it can play an important role in discovery.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, just more on BioAge, basically they went and took drugs off the shelf that pharma companies were trying to get a different indication from, but their data said, hey, that drug is actually going to be amazing for sarcopenia. And so that's why they started with that molecule in the first place.
Hello. On a slightly different note, how far, I'm sure you have started thinking already about like how this data would be licensed, how would be available, do you, in your head, should it be available for everybody to do anything with it? Is it too early to ask? What do you think about this?
So I'll answer with a couple words, but then I think maybe passing it back. Yeah, we like the data to be free, and I think that attribution is very important for many reasons. But the data free, but I think then there's a lot of stuff that can be done to actually monetize on top of that. But maybe different ideas.
Yeah, I think, John, I love your opinion, and I'll also say, ideally, I would love to see a nice spectrum or range of open and privateness, so that rather than being purely open data like New York City taxi cab data, or purely private data, which is my HIPAA data that I need to have consent over and it's extremely regulated, if we can build an ecosystem that has a range of these possibilities, or sometimes it needs to be somewhat anonymized, and sometimes it needs to be monetized, sometimes it doesn't, that can open up so many possibilities. Because the Backyard project is primarily doing decentralized compute, sometimes on open compute networks, sometimes on private compute networks. We are also investing a lot in things like trusted execution environments, encryption of the data over public systems, homomorphic encryption technologies to try to get around some of that. So if we can make it a bit of a plethora for folks to choose their degree of openness, that would be lovely.
I know, Ben, you have some good thoughts on this and about like individuals getting people incentivized.
Absolutely, yeah. I think from my perspective, ultimately, it's up to the individual what happens with their data and where it gets used. Previously, in the past, I've tried to build tools for individuals to directly control where their data goes and what consents they give. I think my opinion now is a bit more nuanced, and I think ultimately people will probably want to delegate out the kind of control of specific different sets of data that they have about themselves to other like-minded individuals through sort of like DAO structures. That's what I expect to happen. So we'll all have opinions on how freely different sets of data about us should be accessed, and we'll kind of control those opinions by forming groups together and saying, hey, this group of people all sort of share the same beliefs as me about health data. We'll sort of form a coalition and a DAO around that, and then we'll decide together what happens with that data. And maybe there'll be some individuals within that who kind of have more strong views, and we'll delegate out the kind of control to them. But I'll have specifically chosen to be part of this group because everyone is kind of like-minded. And then we'll see kind of more free access to data come from certain individuals who say, hey, my health data, I want it to be for the good of the world, give it to everyone. And other individuals who say, no, hey, it's more private to me, I'll give it out more selectively. And that'll happen for kind of all the data about ourselves. We essentially already do that now through our use of apps and tools and things. Some people are more willing to just jump on TikTok and give up their data in exchange for seeing videos, and some people aren't. I think we'll see a kind of more formalization of that process basically around the data that we give up about ourselves.
Just to clarify my, so our focus is to create the synthetic data. So we don't want all the user data to be open, although I think that's open choice, like my genetic data is in every single database. But our focus is to create the synthetic data, which is no longer the actual real user data, and then open that up.
Super, super interesting. I really also the idea that you proposed, Ben, like the data trust aspect of data DAOs, I'm really, really interested in, and you can look that up if you're more interested. Just look up data trust online, and you'll find lots of research about that. Thank you to all the panelists. You all did such a great job, and thanks for the questions. I really like the different. You kind of all have a slightly different approach to this idea of decentralized data. Which is really interesting. So yeah, thanks.